The U.S., as few debate, made a lot of military mistakes in Iraq, but the political mistakes it made could be just as costly. Now, we talk about that and a lot more in part two of my conversation with Emma Skye. From your vantage point and with dealing with the leadership that you were on both our military side and also from some of the sectarian heads, was it a misread, do you believe, on the part of the U.S. administration, just the loyalties that maybe we had brokered, or was it just fatigue because the electorate supported the president's, push to do a drawdown, that they were tired of Iraq and to a degree Afghanistan as well? Do you think the administration knew what probably would happen, or were they surprised by just how much it accelerated back into the problems before the surge?
I think the misreading was understanding the role that America plays as an honest broker inside Iraq. So it was much more about managing the politics. Violence in Iraq is about politics. People use violence to achieve political ends. And I think the misreading was there should have been a transition from a military-led relationship with Iraq to a civilian-led relationship. But what happened was we drew the US military. There was no longer that deep engagement with the elites. So we gave up our soft power. And it was the diplomatic support that was needed, the negotiations, the phone calls, the pressure to try and push Iraqis closer to each other. So things fell apart. The security was good in 2010. Things fell apart when the politics fell apart. When the politics went bad, then violence returned. So it was really, really important to understand that it is about the politics, that you use military means to try and achieve a political outcome and not just as an end in itself. So it wasn't just about keeping troops in Iraq, it was about mediating between the different factions and bringing them closer together. That's what we gave up. That was the critical mistake that we made.
Emma, obviously there's a lot of the public in America that either just had fatigue or maybe even indifference at the end about what was going on in Iraq. But for those who hold a special place of frustration for the Iraqi military, who they see as either sectarian or that will drop their weapons at the first opportunity, is that misplaced, or are they justified in saying we spent a lot of time, a lot of blood and treasure here in getting these folks ready to defend their own country, and they haven't held up their end of the bargain?
I mean, you think for those US soldiers and Marines who served year after year in Iraq, who gave their lives, some of them gave their limbs for that country, who spent years training the Iraqi military, you can understand how devastating it really is for them to look at what has happened. When we were there working alongside the Iraqi military, they were performing quite adequately. At one stage we were leading, then we were partnering, and then we were advising them and allowing them to do independent operations. And they performed well. What happened after we left was that Maliki replaced the competent leaders, the competent officers in the military. He was distrustful of them because he thought they were too close to the Americans. So he replaced them with his own cronies, with people who didn't have the skills, and worse, people who were corrupt. So they took the money that was meant to buy supplies, ammunition and food for the Iraqi soldiers, they took it for themselves. So when you look at when the Islamic State came into Mosul last summer, there was no senior Iraqi officer who gave orders to the soldiers to fight. They weren't given orders to fight. The chain of command had completely evaporated. It's about leadership. And so that's why the soldiers fled. And that's why they left all their equipment when the Islamic State took over. You
wrote about in 2010 when you left that you were sad, angry, and very afraid for Iraq's future. I assume as we speak today, you have no more reason for optimism that things will be better. Is that fair?
I had a premonition this was going to happen because we made mistakes in 2010. And when I left Iraq, I really struggled to make sense of what all that service had been for, all that effort, all that loss of life. So while I'm pessimistic for the short term, this is a land with an incredibly long and amazing history. And you have to hope that a new generation comes along that is inspired by this amazing history to build a better country and better hope for the future.
You speak an open love letter to the soldiers in the military, the U.S. military. In fact, I'll quote you directly. You say, "Amidst the horror of war, I'd experienced more love and camaraderie than I had ever known. I had become part of their band of brothers." So to the folks who don't have a personal relationship with the military, I think it's fair to say for anyone reading the book that they would walk away very proud of the service of the armed forces.
They should be. Americans should be very, very proud of their military. The failures in Iraq are much more to do with lack of a national strategy, lack of a vision for how to achieve a political outcome. When you look at those young Americans who went out there, they did everything that was asked of them and more. They tried so hard, they were so dedicated. So when people should really be proud of what they did, and their service should be recognized. The bigger question of why the greatest country in the world with the greatest military in the world doesn't win its wars is a question for America's politicians to look at and to examine and search in their heart of hearts and think, why does that happen? America has this enormous capacity, this enormous power, but it's not just its military power. Wars need to reach some political solution. And so it's how do we use the different instruments of national power? How do we use the military as a tool and not an end in itself? That's the question for America's political elites and America's civilians to sort out.
Well, that and much more is discussed in the Unraveling: High Hopes and Missed Opportunities in Iraq. It is a fascinating read, and I certainly appreciate the author giving us some time today, Emma Skye.
Thank you very much.
Up next, we're going to turn to Hudson Valley headlines. Please stay with us.